Monster Tech is doing a giveaway on my channel. Stay tuned for details on how you can enter. Hello everybody, this is Odd Job Entertainment, bringing you another video. And today we're going to talk about vehicles. And vehicles not coming out in a timely fashion is nothing new to Star Citizen. This video has the potential to come off as a defense for the slow rollout. That's not the intention. Rather, just as in other of my physics-focused videos for Star Citizen, I want to show how design considerations can vary wildly in a space environment. So let's talk about vehicles, particularly vehicles with wheels. As with any physics analysis, we start with some basic equations. We all know the classic F equals ma, or force equals mass times acceleration. Well, of particular importance for a vehicle is the force of friction. Often we want to minimize friction, but when it comes to handling, friction is everything. The equation for that is mu times the normal force. And the normal force is the resistive force that prevents you from going through a material. Another way to look at this is to say that whenever an object makes contact with a material, it is subject to a force that is perpendicular to the surface, ergo normal to it. When you ride in an elevator and you have that slight feeling of weightlessness, that is a reduction in the normal force as the elevator jerks down slightly faster than gravity can accelerate you downward. But to calculate this normal force, we bring back a familiar looking equation, F equals ma. In your Physics 1 class, you probably saw it written as F equals mg, where g is the acceleration due to gravity. But in reality, it could be any force that pushes an object into the surface. This is an important note because, as is in the case of Star Citizen, we're not always talking about objects on Earth, so the acceleration is not always g. Now let's say we are on Earth for a minute and we're driving our humble Koenigsegg. On Earth, we're used to seeing rubber tires around a rim, and the top-end cars also take advantage of aerodynamic drag to create downforce to push the car further into the ground. This downforce actually increases the friction of those tires, making it so that the car can accelerate faster. The way it does this is actually pretty clever. Remember when we said that the normal force is equal to mg? Well, that's not the full story. If we make up a free body diagram, we can see that the normal force of a stationary Koenigsegg Jesko Absolute is about 1,390 kilograms multiplied by gravity for 13,622 newtons. Now our coefficient of friction has two variants, static and kinetic. But to keep things simple, we are going to assume these values are the same. In reality, the static coefficient of friction is usually higher than kinetic, and that means you have to break down your calculations more. But if we assume that our coefficient of friction is 1.8, which would be in about the range of racing slicks, then our frictional force is 24,519.6 newtons. That frictional force is what enables you to turn, brake, accelerate, and generally stay on the road. Anytime you alter the trajectory of your vehicle, it is limited by that frictional force. If other forces exceed it, bad things happen.
Hell no, to the no, 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 hell to the no.
So we want friction to be as high as possible. Downforce helps us do that. We can manipulate mu to some degree by changing the racing compound, or we can alter the normal force, which is mass times gravity, right? Well, if we add a force pointing downwards, in this case the downforce, the normal force being the only force pointing up in our free body diagram necessarily increases. Otherwise, the car would go through the ground. A few modern supercars can actually create enough downforce at speed that they can drive upside down. So if we assume our Jesko can do that, we can double our normal force, which in turn bumps our frictional force up to 49,039.2 newtons. Now you already know what would happen if you tried to drive upside down in your sedan, so a warning not to try this at home shouldn't even be necessary. But seriously, don't try it.
You underestimate my power! Don't try it!
But what if there's no air? No air means you can't use control surfaces to generate downforce. No downforce means that your friction is severely limited. You may have noticed NASA isn't going for land speed records on Mars. Well, cost aside, Mars has a much thinner atmosphere and much lower gravity than Earth, so the handling of vehicles takes a huge dip. Just look at this footage of the Moon rover. Special thanks to Dennis Shirya for his work in boosting the quality of this footage for everyone to enjoy, by the way. With no atmosphere and low gravity, it's very difficult to maintain control of the vehicle. It's slower to accelerate, and braking and turning all take a dive. Now, where else have I seen that before? You may have noticed on modern spacefaring rovers of today that they generally look a lot different than the cars we drive on Earth. The wheels, for instance, aren't made of rubber. Part of that is to increase durability, but another part is trying to take any advantage they can to improve grip. Metal ribs or wire splines have a better chance of getting over things than a rubber wheel, and if you don't have to worry about comfort or heavy life support systems, then aesthetics and a soft ride can take a back seat. And we can see this inspiration carried over into the design of the Tumbrel series of vehicles. Rather than traditional wheels, they have mechanical scoops that can dig at the ground as it rolls. And a tonk actually makes quite a bit of sense for a space vehicle as it greatly enlarges the contact patch, which would greatly affect the frictional coefficient and enable great traction, assuming you had access to parts and maintenance en masse, as is in the case in Star Citizen. It might not make sense for us real-world people because how are we going to fix a tank when it's 7 years away on Mars? But regardless, in spite of these clever design tricks, the ground vehicles in Star Citizen always feel floaty. That's because in the efforts to make Star Citizen feel realistic, they lean more towards real physics. But that's not necessarily always fun to play. So we've seen that these vehicles have gotten quite a bit of tuning with time, both to improve handling and to make them a little more robust in a crash. Now, we mentioned before that friction is what makes things like braking, accelerating, and turning all possible. I'm sure you've been in cases where a turn happened a lot more quickly than is typically comfortable. Take a roller coaster, for instance. Where most engineering tries to limit the forces felt in a turn, roller coasters try to maximize it while still being safe. So sharp turns, steep hills, and fast speed make these a great demonstration for what our Tumbrel experiences. When you enter one of those turns, you naturally feel your body slipping toward the outside. This is often referred to as the centrifugal force. The Tumbrel experiences the same thing, but it doesn't have rigid metal bars keeping it on a track. So if the turn is too sharp, it has to rely on its suspension to compensate. And you'll see in this video that the Tumbrel seems to lean toward the outside of a turn, and that suspension side is compressing more on those wheels. This also gives us hints into some other things going on in these turns. So long as the wheels do not slip, they are providing a centripetal force toward the interior of the turn, and this force keeps the vehicle turning. But if we consider the center of gravity of the vehicle, we know that it's raised off the ground. The distance between the centripetal force and the center of gravity creates a torque that rotates the vehicle toward the outside of the turn. The suspension has to provide a counterforce to counteract that rotation and keep all the wheels on the ground. But if we make the turn even sharper, we may reach the travel limit of the suspension rod, as well as the force they can provide. When that happens, we enter a roll. Four-wheeled vehicles are generally pretty stable, and it takes a pretty rough turn to make them lose control like this. But what if those outside wheels simply weren't there? Well, now we're talking about the Ranger. Lightweight, so very little mass. Small contact patches, so not a high coefficient of friction relative to the Cyclone. And given what we've already discussed, I think we start to see why designing a motorcycle is a lot different than designing an off-brand Warthog. In this video from Lessix, we can see how leans are vital to a motorcycle being able to make a turn. If you want to try a safer version of this, try to turn on your bike with no leaning at all. Even at very slow speeds, you'll find this nearly impossible. Instinctually, you'll have to lean, else you're going to eat pavement. That oh so important lean is how motorcycle riders counteract the torque throwing the cycle out of the turn. In lieu of compressing the exterior wheel springs, since there are no exterior wheels, they rotate the whole vehicle. This moves the center of gravity into the turn and creates a counter
But
torque
I'm
that,
still leaning, aren't I?
in a successful
Yeah.
turn, cancels out the effect of the first torque. In a video game, a hover bike may actually be easier to make in this sense
Alright.
because the
Nope.
downward thruster output can vary greatly depending on the environment. We also don't have any real-world analog for how a hover bike should perform.
Okay.
The closest thing that people may have experienced would be a motorboat, but a motorcycle has one set of wheels that we as humans expect to perform a certain predictable way. So in a game that tries so hard to be realistic, how do you tune a bike to handle the Earth-like gravity of Microtech and the very low gravity of its moons? Finding the balance between controllability as we experience on Earth and the realistic variability of space environments is quite the game development challenge. And again, I'm not saying this is why the Ranger has taken so long, and I'm not excusing that. I mean, the X1 from Origin is another hover bike, which by my own logic should be easy to develop, right? But it is a design consideration that makes a two-wheeled vehicle much more complicated than what we've seen so far. From an engineering perspective, if I had to pick between manufacturing a rover, tank, or a bike, I just know I wouldn't pick the bike. It brings so many limitations with it that it's not very practical in a spacefaring setting, and we haven't even begun to mention things like cargo capacity. At the end of the day, Star Citizen is still a game. The developers could easily just do some hand-wavy declaration and make the Ranger handle the same in all environments under the rule of cool. This wouldn't be unheard of in gaming at large, but it would be against the grain for CIG to ever do things the easy way. But I hope this discussion has opened your mind to some of the considerations engineers have to make when they're designing the vehicles of tomorrow, even if it is just a game. Are we ever going to see motorcycles on Mars? Maybe not. Given what we've talked about, it could be pretty challenging to give the same kind of exhilarating feeling of a motorcycle on a planet with lower gravity and no atmosphere. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of the video, and we are doing a giveaway courtesy of MonsterTech. They are giving away a set of chair or desk mounts to one lucky viewer. All you have to do to be entered to win is like and subscribe to my channel and comment on any of my videos during the giveaway period with that video's corresponding secret word. Each video is another chance to enter, and by this point, you've got quite a backlog of possible entries. MonsterTech makes very solid products, and I'm happy to have them as a channel sponsor. I've been nothing but pleased with the chair that I recorded on, and I use it every day, honestly. Whether I'm doing my artwork, playing games, or doing even just schoolwork, the MFC flight chair that I have is perfect for me. And the fact that it has these custom-mounted joysticks is just icing on the cake. MonsterTech is a really solid company to work with. I'm really happy to have them as a supporter of the channel. And today's secret word is the name of the two-wheeled motorcycle that we talked about. Let's continue the conversation down below. What kinds of limitations do you think a two-wheeled vehicle has in a space game like Star Citizen? Let me know what you think, and until next time, this is Oddjob Entertainment, signing off.